Hello everyone, and welcome to the third and final day of the CILIP Rare Books and Special Collections Group annual conference on the subject of standards, systems and discoverability of special collections. I'll be chairing today. I'm Alex Kiffer and I am the Secretary of the Rare Books and Special Collections Group. So we have 4 talks today. Each one is 20 minutes, followed by 10 minutes for question and answer. Just as was the case over the last 2 days for those of you who attended. At the end of each talk, as I say, there'll be time for questions and answers. So please do put any questions either in the Q&A function in Microsoft Teams, or you can put your questions in the chat as well. If you have any comments or subjects for discussion as well, do feel free to put them in the chat. There's been quite a bit of lively discussion, particularly yesterday, between attendees in the chat, so do make the most of that function. I think there also, at the end of the day, there will be a wrap-up from our chair, Tanya Kirk, who will also give some information about the recordings of these talks. They'll all be recorded and made available afterwards. But I'll leave it at that, and we'll move on to our first talk today. So our first speakers are Amelie Roper and Suzanne Paul from the University of Cambridge, and they will be talking on the, introducing the AI for Cultural Heritage Hub ARC. Over to you.
Thanks, Alex. I'll just share my screen. How's that?
Yes, we can see that.
Excellent. Right, okay, so hello everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak today. So my name is Amelie Roper and I'm Head of Research at Cambridge University Library. With me today is my colleague Suzanne Paul, Keeper of Rare Books and Early Manuscripts. And we're here to introduce you to a project we're currently working on in Cambridge, which is the AI for Cultural Heritage Hub project, also known as ARCH. I'm the overall lead for the project and Suzanne is the curatorial lead. Just going to try and move on next slide. Okay, so over the next 20 minutes or so, we'll tell you what ARCH is. We'll describe the work we've been doing on some of the case studies that underpin it. We'll share our thoughts on interim findings and next steps and tell you a bit about where you can find more information about ARCH. The project is midway through, so all of what we are talking about is very much a work in progress. So what is ARCH? So ARCH is a short research project to create a workspace and a community of practice that will enable non-technical users, by which we mean those working in galleries, libraries, archives and museums, and academics working with cultural heritage collections, to analyse cultural heritage data securely with AI tools. By cultural heritage data, we essentially mean data about the items we hold in cultural heritage collections. As you'll all be really aware, the most typical data types will be metadata or descriptions of the items in our collections and digital images of them. So when we talk about ARCH or the hub, we mean 2 things. Firstly, a secure workspace or a platform built using open systems and standards that could potentially be replicated by other organisations. Users can log in, upload their own cultural heritage data, and experiment with AI tools that meet their use cases. And secondly, we mean a community of practice to support the use of the hub. Creating a secure workspace is a key aspect of our project, as lots of cultural heritage data is sensitive for reasons we all know, such as copyright restrictions, data protection, outdated or offensive language, just to name a few. We therefore wanted to create a space where AI could be used on cultural heritage data without that data being retained by AI engines or exposed outside of the hub. So when is the project running? So the answer is now. It's a 14-month project running until the end of March 2026. We were awarded just over £170,000 of funding from AI at CAM, which is the bit of the University of Cambridge that coordinates activities relating to AI. So it's a short and experimental proof of concept project rather than attempt to build a polished hub. So I'll now talk a little bit about who's working on Arch. So a really important aspect of the project is that it's drawing together expertise from many different disciplines. Cultural heritage practitioners, so librarians like us, archivists, cataloguers, curators, digital humanities specialists, AI experts, developers, and academics. It's a collaborative project led by Cambridge University Library, working with the Department of Maths in Cambridge and the Collections Connections Communities Strategic Research Initiative. That's one of the research initiatives in Cambridge that supports research that runs across our collections. And we're also collaborating with researchers in Birkbeck and Liverpool and have an advisory board with representatives from our sector more widely. Only a few of the team are pictured here, but in total there are 16 of us working on the project. So why are we building the hub? I think this will probably be really familiar to this audience, but in addition to the concerns around data sensitivity, we're really concerned with improving access to our collections and making them more discoverable. And we think that AI has enormous potential to help with making collections more accessible in various ways. So that's really what the project is exploring. How can we harness the power of AI to make collections more accessible? I'm now going to say a little bit about how we're developing the hub. So our approach has been really shaped by the funding we received. The AI at CAM call we applied to required us to address specific cultural heritage challenges. So this meant that we ended up framing our application and therefore the project around 3 challenges: unlocking inaccessible data, reassembling fragmentary and dispersed cultural objects, and integrating expert cultural knowledge into AI algorithms. AI is also a funder that really values collaboration. They invited everybody who was interested in the call to pitch an idea and then attend a workshop before they actually applied for funding. We pitched the idea of the hub and 2 more case studies, but when we attended the workshop, we came across lots of other researchers and practitioners working with collections in Cambridge who wanted to use AI to do particular things on the collections. So we decided to join this all together and make a big collaborative application led by Cambridge, but with contributions from other collections, including the Zoology Museum, the Herbarium, the Fitzwilliam Museum, and the Scott Polar Research Institute, and experts from our maths department. So the result is a highly collaborative project that's framed around 6 case studies, and Suzanne will go into a bit more detail about these later. So what can the hub do? So at the moment, the hub has just been available to all the team that are working on it and those who attend our workshops. So we've been holding workshops to kind of build the requirements of the hub and drive forward each of the case studies. The key things that it can do are transcribe text, image recognition, so identify image entities, so what's in an image. It can analyse text for language and sentiment. It can generate text from audio, and you can also chat with an AI assistant. So I'm now going to pass over to Suzanne, who will tell you a little bit more about, oh no, I'm not. I'm just going to tell you first of all about the methodology, a bit more about the methodology for the project, and then I'll pass you over to Suzanne. So yeah, we've got 4 work strands underpinning the project. So we've got the first one, which is broadly the hub. So that's about developing the hub. Then we've got the case studies, which Suzanne will talk about in a minute. We've got our community of practice. And then a really important part of the project is gathering feedback from everybody that attends our workshops and events so that we can then implement that into the hub. So that's become quite a formalised part of the process. The project will have a variety of outputs alongside the hub. So we want to have guidance and workflows embedded with the hub, the community of practice I've talked about, obviously code, workshops, presentations, blog posts, journal articles. And at the end, we hope the things that will have changed is that some collections, at least in Cambridge, the ones that we've worked on, will be more discoverable. We'll know a bit more about them. We'll have opened up some new avenues for research. And we will have made a wider pool of people a bit more knowledgeable about how to use AI on cultural heritage collections. And now I really will give the floor to Suzanne.
So I'm going to talk about some of the case studies in more detail and the progress that we've made so far. Our case studies are deliberately diverse, engaging with different types of cultural heritage collections, different institutions, and experts across numerous disciplines, including those who have significant experience of using AI tools and those who are novices. So these are the 6. I'm going to focus particularly on those case studies that most closely relate to the theme of this conference, that is, those that aim to enhance the discoverability and usability of collections. So the first case study, you won't be surprised to learn, concerns card catalogues. I don't have to explain to this audience what the problem is or why we might want to solve it. Briefly, we have, I want to say tens of thousands, but actually it's more like hundreds of thousands of items that are only recorded on cards. These holdings are largely invisible and inaccessible. It was a real priority for the librarians within the project to explore the use of AI tools to transcribe library catalogue cards and see whether we can use these tools to generate reliable metadata we can incorporate into our online catalogue. I know that many of you have been experimenting with this, whether that's using integrated AI assistants in an LMS or standalone large language models or other tools, and we'd be really interested to hear more about the methods that others have found effective. As part of the project, we're going to send out a questionnaire to gather some information about what's happening in other places, and we will share back with everybody in the hope that we can all learn from each other. On our part, we've had some really good preliminary results using large language models to generate data from scanned cards and structuring it into a usable form. But the main work of this case study actually kicks off next week with a workshop bringing together colleagues from across Cambridge University libraries and their card catalogues. We're keen to evaluate a variety of tools to see which are more effective, to see how AI copes with cards of different layouts, different languages, and those recording special formats such as sheet music or maps. And following on from this workshop, we'll work with a smaller group of colleagues on a pilot project to establish an effective workflow for incorporating the use of AI tools into some aspects of our cataloguing, and we will share the results. The second case study is based in the University Museum of Zoology, but is actually more of an archival project. The museum is just over 200 years old and has paper accession records and notebooks documenting the provenance of its specimens and the circumstances of their collection. Some of these go right back to the foundation of the museum, which was, of course, a time of huge scientific discovery. These records are vital, not just for the museum in understanding and documenting its collection items, they also hold crucial yet inaccessible data on things like climate change, biodiversity loss, and the impact of empire and colonialism. If they can be made accessible and searchable, they have the potential to enhance research of enormous global importance. The question here was, could AI help with the transcription of these handwritten documents and help to organise it in a structured and searchable format where it could be of use to the museum curators and external researchers? It's not enough to transcribe the contents. To be usable, things like dates, place names, and species names have to be identified as such. The project is serving as a proof of concept as the museum explores various ways of generating metadata at speed to create machine-readable datasets for the DISCO initiative. We worked with the museum's curators to run a workshop in May, bringing together practitioners and researchers to test out various AI tools and assess how they coped with the tasks. One issue, of course, is that data which was already structured on paper, like registers, were much more challenging for AI transcription tools than straightforward or lightly structured prose, such as correspondence. So at the top of the slide here, you can see an example of one of the museum registers. We learned hands-on about the value of breaking a task down into stages, pre-processing the images to make the text clearer, separating out the layout and structure of text from transcription, and refining our prompts. The museum curators particularly appreciated the security of working within the hub. The early records are from a time of imperial and colonial acquisition, and some of the language used is offensive. Curators need to be able to work with the transcriptions of the documents and review their contents before sharing them more widely. The museum has followed up on the workshop by focusing on the most structurally straightforward material, that is, lists and letter collections, like the material on the right. Volunteers are scanning documents, using AI to transcribe them, and then reviewing the transcriptions. We're hoping to generate some data on how this process compares in terms of time taken to non-AI assisted volunteer transcription, which the museum has been doing for quite some time. The next case study explores a very fragmentary papyrus roll in partnership with the curator of Egyptology at the Fitzwilliam Museum and an academic papyrologist. The question is whether AI tools can assist in determining the placement of the various fragments. Initially, I thought of this as just like basically doing a huge jigsaw, but apparently it's much more complicated than that. The picture here shows all the edge pieces of the roll. It's not enough to look at the size and shape of the pieces and join them together, since we don't have all the pieces, and the ones we have were not neatly detached from each other. In theory, this should be a very suitable task for multimodal AI models, since it involves processing large amounts of image data and using prediction and pattern recognition. The first thing to do has been the painstaking task of imaging all the fragments, over 3,000 of them, which has taken place over the summer. Our AI expert from the maths department, Wallace, has started training a model using a subset of this image data plus existing metadata. As well as the text and images, he's also training the model to look at the pattern of the papyrus fibres. Combining different types of information offers a better chance of it suggesting suitable matches. And having Wallace design a bespoke model like this, working closely with the papyrus experts, enables him to test and refine the data and keep tweaking the algorithm to get a better result. Actually, the first important results came not through AI, but through looking at the fragments really intensively in the process of imaging. So the papyrologist Joel has proposed that the fragments we have actually come from 2 different books, just to complicate matters even further. But we can feed information from his observation of the images into the model and rework it. So this project has really been an iterative and collaborative process of review, suggest, tweak between the AI expert and the papyrus expert. The next case study is based in the library. It focuses on a manuscript from the Bible Society, a 16th century lectionary, which is written in Latin and Nahuatl, the Aztec language. It was written in Mexico in a Christian missionary context, but probably by indigenous scribes. The case study was led by one of the Mumby Fellows who's been embedded at the university library for the past year, Josh. He had several research questions which we thought might be useful to test out AI models. The first was to investigate the decorated letters in the manuscript. You can just see one in the bottom corner here, and compare them with a wider corpus of Mesoamerican glyphs and pictographs from digitized manuscripts. Could the model suggest similarities that scholars hadn't noticed and help uncover connections between pre-colonial and colonial linguistic and visual elements? Working with Wallace, the AI expert, again, to train a bespoke model. The results of this have been really promising. We also held a workshop in May as part of this case study with a group of experts in Nahuatl and discussed the results, as well as some of the ethical issues involved in the use of AI in relation to indigenous materials. For example, the corpus on which the models are trained depends on what has been digitized, which essentially means the sources in European and US institutions, which may not be representative of the corpus as a whole, so may end up skewing the results. We talked about the value of expert knowledge in designing, training, and reviewing projects incorporating AI. In many cases, as in this one, the knowledge resides in indigenous communities who may not be included or even consulted. So we've been thinking about the question, how can we ensure that their knowledge is valued and respected and not exploited? So these are our interim kind of updates. I'll now pass on to Amelie to say a little bit more.
So yeah, I'll just wrap up our paper by telling you a little bit about, sort of at a higher level, about some of the things that we've learned so far. So one of the really important findings has been how important our multidisciplinary team is and how actually valuable all of these quite disparate case studies have been in creating a hub that we actually think will meet the needs of our sector. I have to admit that I was really aware at the beginning of the project of the challenge of kind of bringing together all of these different skills and all of these different collections and use cases, and how are we going to make this into a cohesive project. But actually, as the project progresses, that's emerging as one of its greatest strengths. Since we applied for funding in Cambridge, as I'm sure in many of your organisations, there have also been lots of conversations and initiatives about how to use AI for what we might call business operations, so to help with daily work tasks. And one of the things that we found from working on Arch is that our project has a lot of overlap with this, particularly in terms of the work that we're doing on card catalogues. What the research project offers is a focused opportunity to explore these kind of tools systematically and to write up and publish findings, and of course funding to support this. We've also found that there's enormous potential to use AI to generate good quality metadata, but we're finding that rather than aiming for an end-to-end workflow using AI, it's better to identify which parts of a cataloguing workflow, for example, AI can do really well, and insert those at key points. But doing this is really challenging, and that's where this combination of different skills again becomes really important. Technical knowledge of AI is really important, but also knowledge and other types of knowledge and skills are really important too. So where are we going next? So I've only got time to touch on this briefly, but obviously we're going to continue working on the case studies. Some are more advanced than others, building our community of practice and running workshops and events. We're also planning a new release of the hub and are investigating developing our own LLM instead of calling out to existing services. After the end of March 2026, when our funding runs out and the project finishes, we'll be running a workshop with separate funding, we hope, to plan next steps in more detail. And our vision remains for Arch to be much more widely available. So we hope this short presentation has left you wanting to find out a bit more about Arch. If it has, please join our mailing list using the QR code or the link on the slides. That's a good way to find out about project events and updates. You can also check our website or contact us by email. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. It was a very interesting talk, and it's a fantastic initiative, it seems, as it's developing. So I can see there's already one question come in. If other people want to put their questions into the chat as we go, I will start with the question here from Vance, which is, which parts of cataloging workflows do you believe AI is capable of doing well? And how much time does it take to train it versus traditional approaches, i.e. cataloging by people?
you want me to say something like that? So we haven't needed to do much training to date. So the basic transcription of a record, I think, given a good prompt and kind of iterative use of that prompt with that particular set of cards will get you quite far. Things that we haven't managed to crack yet are things like the coded fields. And we think that might be, which are obviously really important, and that might be better left to other kind of processes. But yes, we should be able to say more about that after the card catalogues workshop next week. That's what we found in our initial testing, though.
Excellent, thank you. And they're coming in thick and fast now. So the next one, you mentioned the aim of the project is about improving AI algorithms and LLMs by integrating expert cultural knowledge. I'm interested in whether libraries and collections can help to counter the English language and Western-centric biases of existing AI models. Is this something you have been working on or thinking about for the future in this area?
I think that's one element of the project. We are very conscious of, I mean, in terms of accessibility of our collections and, you know, things in a multiplicity of languages. It's also something that the AI researchers that we've been working with in Cambridge are interested in and focused on, in terms of the specificity of data of different from different kind of cultural backgrounds. So it is something that they're working from a research angle, and we're giving them some practical examples to work with. So it's actually been quite a good kind of collision of interests. It's definitely something that both practically and theoretically we are very aware of.
I think we will be using a variety of cards at our card catalogue workshop next week, including in lots of different languages and potentially in different scripts as well. So yeah, watch this space.
There's another question, which is, it would be great to know which software is working best and which approach might work best, say, in a smaller institution, especially regarding card catalogues and the matching up of fragments.
So the matching up of fragments is all very bespoke work that we're not sure whether it will land in the hub or not. So one of the things I didn't have time to say in the presentation, but is important that we found out in the project is, so we've got these 6 case studies that are very different, and we're finding that some of them are too much of a stretch to actually put into the hub. So the papyrus one, which is resting on how do you analyze the fiber patterns, that at least at the moment is just too niche to then feed into the hub.
Yeah, but I think things like card catalogues, the big available models, the ChatGPTs, the Claude or whatever, are actually producing, you know, pretty good results without needing to do very much in the way of training. But yeah, as I say, next week we'll be evaluating them all, and yeah, sign up for the newsletter. We will be sharing our results for sure.
And the next iteration of the hub, which we're not able to use yet, it literally went live this morning. Our developer has fed in is probably not the correct technical term, but wired up probably isn't the right term, but you can access different models and experiment with them, so you can sort of toggle between them and try different ones and see which one works best. But we haven't had any problems, as Suzanne said, with the basics. We're just using Claude, Anthropic.
Another question here. So at the Natural History Museum, we sometimes find we have to maintain old location names because the information given isn't accurate enough to update them. For example, Czechoslovakia. Did you encounter similar challenges with your data? And if so, what did you do? Also on the registers, are you linking the data with other object metadata?
I don't think we've got that far in the processes. That is the completely honest answer. There's another case study which Suzanne didn't talk about because we we haven't started it, which is about the labels for the herbarium specimens, and the location names was sort of flagged very early on as a problem for that one, or an area of interest, should we say, should we reframe it? But we haven't looked at that. Is the completely honest answer.
And the museum curators are very keen to link up data that's in the registers and to incorporate it into their kind of online metadata and into the data sets that they already have about the objects. Yeah, and that in itself can be a real challenge to match up an individual specimen with the record. You know, takes their expert kind of decision making to associate them. So it's not something that you can just automatically merge two data sets. That really involves kind of expert knowledge of the collections.
We found the registers were so complicated as well in terms of their structure that actually just getting the data out in a good structured form has turned out to be the major part of that challenge of that case study, that we haven't kind of been able to move on to those. The zoology case study haven't been able to move on to those kind of linking up because the transcription initially was not of a good enough quality, or rather the structuring was not.
Thank you. And I think we've got time for one more question. So we've got a question here. I'd be interested to hear how your system copes with cards or other records in multiple scripts. For example, a single card that is written using both Latin and Cyrillic. We
haven't tested that yet.
I'm quite confident on that one. I think it will handle that. I think if you tell it that to look out for multiple scripts, I think you'll be able to distinguish.
Hopefully we'll have some examples like that next week as well. Yeah,
we certainly have cards like that.
I have to say, I was really impressed with and surprised by the quality of the results from the cards. Yeah, in the initial tests.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Well, I think you know, there's certainly one that people want to keep an eye on. A number of people have asked for information about following the mailing list, and I see Rianne has shared a link with more information and the link to the newsletter there. So I hope plenty of people do sign up. But thank you both again for a wonderful talk to start off today. Greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And so we will swiftly move on to our second talk of the day. This is being delivered by Christine McGowan of the University of Edinburgh and Katie Birkwood of the Royal College of Physicians in London. And together they will be talking on interacting and influencing international standards, the controlled vocabulary for rare materials cataloguing, among others. Over to you.
All right. Can everybody hear me okay? Hopefully.
Yep, we can hear you.
Great. So before I start, I should mention that in my presentation, there's a lot of links to additional information in my slides. So I have made it available to download from Google Drive. I've just dropped the link into the chat, but it's also on the slides themselves. So this does also include my speaker's notes for anybody who might benefit from a transcription generated by an actual human. So with that, hello. My name is Christine McGowan. I'm the Research Collections Discovery and Projects Manager for the Heritage Collections Department at the University of Edinburgh. I'm also the current chair of the RBSCG Bibliographic Standards Committee, and it's in that capacity that I'm going to be evangelizing to you today about cataloging standards and why you should see them not just as something to follow, but as something that you can influence and change for the better. Many of the cataloging standards that we follow in the UK are created and maintained by organizations outside of CILIP. Often, they're not always based in the USA as either parts of the Library of Congress or the American Library Association. For many years, the CILIP Rare Books and Special Collections Group's Bibliographic Standards Committee was chaired by Iris O'Brien, who's the Early Printed Collections Cataloging and Processing Manager for the British Library. Not only was Iris the chair of RBSCG Bib Standards, she was also a member of the Bib Standards Committee of the American Library Association's Rare Books and Manuscripts section, RBMS. After Iris rotated off of RBSCG bib standards, we no longer had anyone in our committee who was also a voting member on the RBMS committee, which led to something of an identity crisis. It begged the question, if we don't have direct editorial control over the cataloging standards that we use, what's the point of RBSCG's Bibliographic Standards Committee? And that, in turn, sort of became the starting point for this presentation, which is to ask more broadly, how can members of the RBSCG community interact with standards created and maintained by other organizations? And why should we? An answer to that came partly from Katie Birkwood's paper at last year's conference on how her institution catalogs pressed plants and other objects found inside of books. Her experience of submitting a new term to the RBMS controlled vocabulary reminded me that there are plenty of ways to get involved in the creation and maintenance of bibliographic standards without formal committee membership and the membership dues that entails. Today, I'll be focusing specifically on the cataloging standards maintained by RBMS, not only because they're widely used, but because RBMS enthusiastically welcomes input from the international special collections community. If you're interested in hearing more about other standards, I'm very happy to take questions or chat with you outside of this presentation. So, RBMS is to the American Library Association what SILIP is to what RBSCG is to SILIP. But as the population of American rare books librarians is somewhat larger, there are a few additional levels in the RBMS org chart. At the top of the chart, we have the American Library Association. And then underneath that is the Association of College and Research Libraries, and then the Rare Books and Manuscripts section. Within RBMS, there are committees for ongoing functions like conference planning and budgeting, task forces for one-off activities like revising and updating published guidelines, discussion groups for fostering sector-wide communication, and liaisons to allied organizations where RBMS members are among the major stakeholders. While the majority of RBMS members are based in the USA, they actively welcome dialogue with the entire community of special collections professionals, regardless of geographic location. In the past, RBMS business was conducted in person at conferences, but between the rising financial and environmental cost of travel and the need to pivot to remote working after the pandemic, much of the section's work has moved online, with many opportunities for asynchronous involvement, which is a very good thing for those of us in different time zones. Since this is a conference about metadata and discovery, I'm going to look in detail about the work of two RBMS committees in particular, the Bibliographic Standards Committee, or BSC, and the Controlled Vocabularies Editorial Group, CVEG. The Bibliographic Standards Committee serves as the ALA representative of rare books, manuscript, and other special collections professionals in matters involving standards for providing intellectual access to those collections. In practice, this means that they not only write and edit their own cataloging rules, but also comment on other standards such as MARC and RDA, organize training and discussion sessions, and liaise with allied organizations both within and without the behemoth that is the American Library Association. There are several subgroups within the RBMS BSC which undertake different strands of work, not least of which is creating and maintaining the Descriptive Cataloging of Rare Materials, or DCRM. Between 2011 and 2016, the DCRM editorial board published separate descriptive cataloging modules for books, serials, graphics, cartographic materials, music, and manuscripts. Then in 2022, the RBMS RDA editorial board published Descriptive Cataloging of Rare Materials RDA edition, or DCRMR. At the moment, DCRMR includes RDA-compliant cataloging rules for books, and the incorporation of graphics is currently underway. But eventually, the plan is for the standard to include all formats. And at this point, I just want to pause for a second and offer profuse thanks to Iris O'Brien for her many years of service on the RBMS RDA editorial group, making DCRMR a reality. In addition to the work that goes into editing DCRM, BSC subgroups publish resources like the Catalogers Directory, standard citation forms for rare materials cataloging, and the directory of web resources for the Rare Materials Cataloger. The BSC also has liaisons to separate but related organizations like the Library of Congress, OCLC, and the ALA Committee for Cataloging on Description and Access, which is their primary channel for interacting with the RDA Steering Committee. Liaison reports are a very efficient way of staying informed about changes to MARC and RDA, which are particularly relevant to rare materials. And since the RBSCG Bib Standards Committee no longer has a member who sits also on the RBMS Bib Standards Committee, I've recently been working with their co-chairs to create an official liaison role from our committee to theirs. In fact, I'm currently looking for volunteers, so if anybody is interested in that role, please do contact me after this presentation. Controlled Vocabulary's editorial group, CVEG, began as a subgroup of the Bib Standards Committee, but is now an independent committee which develops and maintains the RBMS Controlled Vocabulary for Rare Materials Cataloging, or CVRMC. What was previously 6 separate thesauri for genre, binding, printing, publishing, paper, provenance, and type evidence terms has been deduplicated, disambiguated, and merged into a single vocabulary for use in 655 fields for genre form headings. The CVRMC site is also where you'll find a list of relationship designators, particularly relevant to rare materials cataloging. The CVRMC is continuously being updated, not only with new terms and new scope notes for existing terms, but also to review systemic issues with the vocabulary as a whole. For example, they recently undertook a project to improve the organization, consistency, and coverage of the prejudicial works section of the vocabulary. And at the moment, there's a group examining and working to address issues of Western bias in the controlled vocabulary. So, as you can see, there's a lot of really interesting work going on across RBMS. But why should heritage professionals in the UK care what the Americans are doing? If you've ever found a gap in coverage or a problem with a published standard, then there's a good chance that someone else has had exactly that same thought. By interacting with the editorial groups rather than just devising local workarounds, you not only get access to feedback and problem-solving skills from a much wider community of heritage professionals, you ensure that your work benefits the entire professional community and not just your local institution. The easiest way to get started is simply to attend a meeting. Meetings for both the BSC and CVEG are held online and are open to all. Meeting dates and times are announced on the DCRML email list. Meetings typically last about an hour and may begin anytime between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. US Eastern Time, which is 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. UK time. This unfortunately means that they do often fall outside of UK business hours, but not so late in the evening that it's impossible to manage. Both groups are very welcoming to visitors and invite questions and comments in the chat, but if you can't attend in real time, the agendas and minutes are posted to both DCRML and shared on the ALA Connect website, which is the American Library Association's professional networking platform. You don't need to be a member of ALA to create a login for ALA Connect, and the BSC have created an orientation document, which I've linked to on this slide, which includes instructions for how to create an account as a non-member. At different stages, RBMS committees announce via the DCRML listserv that they're inviting comments on drafts and new documents and changes to existing documents. RBMS welcomes feedback from anyone in the heritage sector, not just ALA members, so this is another good way to get involved. The RBSCG, that being our Bib Standards Committee, does also monitor these announcements. So if you're not comfortable responding individually, you're very welcome to contact us and we'll pass your comments on to our American colleagues. Yet another way to get involved is to submit a proposal for a new term or citation form. Katie Burkwood's going to talk about her experience doing exactly that in just a minute, which will hopefully make the process seem more friendly and approachable than you might expect. Finally, if something that the RBMS committees are doing really catches your attention, the working groups and subgroups do accept non-members as volunteers at the chair's discretion. A lot of the work is done asynchronously via email, wikis, Google Docs, and blogs, and the group chairs are generally very happy to talk with you about how the work will be done and the level of time commitment involved, so don't be afraid to reach out. And with that, I'm going to stop talking and hand the floor over to Katie to tell you what it was like working with the Controlled Vocabularies editorial group.
Thank you very much, Christine. Okay, can people hear me? Yes? And can you see my slides?
Yes.
Amazing. Okay, so those of you who were at last year's conference may remember that I spoke about pressed plants in books. For those who weren't there, very briefly, just to say, it's a thing that happens. You will more often than you imagine find remains of plants or other organic material in books. And up until now, there haven't really been any guidelines or any information about how you should be cataloguing those, but they are an increasing area of research in various disciplines. So it's important that we do catalogue them in some kind of controlled way if we can. And when I first started finding these objects in books in the collection I work with at the Royal College of Physicians, I thought, well, it would be great if what we could have would be a genre heading term that we could apply to records for items that have these things in them. So what I wanted to do was, at that time, it was a while ago, to look in the old RBMS controlled vocabularies that used to look like this to see if there was a term, and there wasn't anything. Those vocabularies now look like this. Instead, as Christine has said, the separate ones have been merged into a single thesaurus. But still, with that merging, nobody else had got round to putting in something for pressed plants. So I thought maybe I had better do it. If you're only vaguely familiar with these, they're what you'd use in a 655 field. You can use various different genre headings in a 655 field. If you're using the RBMS ones, you put a 7 in the second indicator, the term, $2 for where you've got it from. So it used to be a lot of separate terms for the different thesauri. Now it's just RBM, SCV, and then your institutional code and the $5. So I had a think and a chat with people who are also interested in this, and ultimately there was a seminar at the Linnaean Society where librarians and conservators and researchers all working with this material talked about the different things we wanted these terms to do and how we might actually formulate them in a thesaurus. And we decided we needed 2 different terms: pressed plants, which is pretty self-explanatory, and biological insertions, at which you are all allowed to snigger, but I promise you we couldn't think of a better term. And that's for everything that's not a plant, but is still some kind of organic material, particularly fungi. There is a constituency of people who are really into fungi, and fungi are not plants, so they have to have their own separate term. So we created this hierarchy within the existing provenance section of the RBMS terms. And they already had something for insertions to do with provenance, so we nested them under there, and we thought that would be a good way to proceed. So then I got on with the RBMS form, which is just a nice simple Google form, and it only really has 2 main sections apart from the one that says, who are you and how do we contact you? And the first part of the form asks you, what term do you want? Where have you got that phrase from being used? And a couple of researchers had already been using this particular term, pressed plants, in their research, so I could cite that. Please tell us all the places you haven't found it already. Where is it not existing already? And I'd looked in various thesauri that I thought might help out across museums, bindings, art, and libraries. And please tell us what sort of records you'd want to use this term on. Don't suggest a term if you don't have a book that you'd want to be using it on. So I could suggest some records from our own catalogue and from other institutions who have been trying to deal with this material. The second part of the form is just tell us what the rest of this term would be. So give us a scope note, explain what it's for. What are the variant terms that you'd have as useful headings? So we had preserved flowers, pressed flowers, preserved plants, that sort of thing. Where does it sit within the hierarchy? And anything else. So I could explain in the general comments field that this term had been born out of specific discussions with people in the field. So I submitted this quite long and wordy, useful scope note, used for any physical remains of plant materials, so on and so on, and also if there's staining from plant material. That goes to the CVEG committee, who discuss it in one of their meetings, which people can attend. And then they came back to me a bit later and said, yes, we've approved the terms, but we'd like a shorter scope note, and we'd like, if you want to have a term for stains and ghost impressions, please put that in a separate term, which I'm still working towards submitting. Once the committee has approved it, the term then goes for community discussion for a couple of weeks. So early in this year, oddly, this slide I have just seen says that the discussion period for this term was from January 22, 2005. It wasn't, it was from January the 22nd, 2025. But there we go. So there was a couple of weeks for people in the community to comment on it, and various people did. And then on the basis of those comments, you can say, yes, I love it. No, I hate it. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? If the committee then thinks that the comments have been broadly positive, they implement any changes they think need, and your term ends up in the thesaurus. So all in all, this was from actually submitting it to getting it into the thesaurus, I think was about 9 months, which included quite a long break over the summer where the committee wasn't meeting. I think I submitted it just after the summer break started. And it was a lovely process. I worked with Jenny and Sarah, 2 of the editors, and they were great, and they were really pleased to have someone submitting. It wasn't an adversarial process at all. So I warmly encourage you to do likewise. Thank you. That's the end of me.
You're on mute, Christine.
There we go. At the beginning of this presentation, I asked, if we aren't the ones writing the standards, what's the point of the RBSCG Bibliographic Standards Committee? And I believe that the answer is to support the community who uses the standards. I'm always eager to hear from you about how best we can do that, but here are some of the ways that I've thought of. We can offer advice and guidance if you have questions about implementing or interpreting standards at your own institution, whether those are RBMS standards covered in this presentation or any others that might be relevant to your work. We can also offer training and workshops, whether you're a new professional, a curator who only catalogs on occasion, or a general collections cataloger who only works with rare materials on occasion. Let us know what type of training you're looking for, and we'll work to arrange something. And then if, after watching this presentation, you're inspired to draft a proposal, but you don't want to go through the process on your own, we're happy to offer feedback and support. And finally, if you're a solo cataloger or just looking for some additional peer support, we can help put you in contact with other professionals. In fact, one great way to build your professional network is to join our committee. In case anyone missed it in the last RBSCG newsletter, the Bibliographic Standards Committee has openings for a couple of new members. And as I mentioned earlier, we're looking to appoint our first official liaison to the RBMS Bibliographic Standards Committee. So if you're interested, please reach out to me after this presentation. To wrap up, I hope this helps you to see standards not just as rules that are imposed on you, but as collaborative resources that we as heritage professionals can collectively work to change and improve. I hope that Katie's experience shows you that the process is not intimidating or unachievable, but that if you do want support, the RBSCG Bibliographic Standards Committee is here to help. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you both for that talk, and hopefully that has encouraged a few people here who have got a term in mind to go ahead and submit it in the same way that you did, Katie. We've got a few questions. So the first one is quite a practical one, but does biological insertions include crushed spiders?
So I've put an answer to this in the chat already because I forgot I was going to have a chance to actually speak answers out loud. So the scope note for biological insertions reads, use for remains of organic material placed inside another item, typically a bound volume. So a spider is definitely organic material, but I think it depends a bit on whether we think the spiders we find in books were placed there or whether they just crawled in there and died. So I don't know, the plants and seaweeds and fungi and things I was thinking about with this term were very much the sorts of things that have been put in there, put in a book deliberately to be pressed and potentially preserved long term there. There's an interesting question. If someone's caught a spider in a book just to catch it or by accident, does that count or not? if you've got a collection of preserved spiders in a book, absolutely this counts for that. And I'm not putting anything past the collectors of the world to have put together.
I'm sure that at least one person here does, or at least some other arachnid or insect. Another question here. So comment, this is a very timely, as we have recently engaged with a process in our institution, such as this. Looking forward to seeing how it progresses. Is the duration for a change to an already existing term the same as a proposal of a new term, that being 9 months, or is there a difference?
Could we invite, I think Sarah from the committee is on the call. She would probably be the best person. I don't know if Sarah Hoover, I don't know if she's got a speaker link and can talk, or she could put answer in the chat.
I can say,
or Christine, do you know? Sorry, yeah.
well, I at the risk of overstepping my boundaries, I can make an educated guess that it is sort of similar. It really depends on the current queue of terms waiting for updates and additions to the thesaurus. So it looks like Sarah can address that in the chat. The CVEG group does meet several times a year and does commit or undertake a lot of discussion in between meetings as well. So there is kind of a constant churn of discussion around new materials.
Perfect, thank you. And perhaps also, Sarah, if you can put any more information about that in the chat for people who might be interested, that'd be greatly appreciated. If I may have a question whilst other people put theirs in the chat as well. So some of these terms obviously are quite specific, and sometimes you'll have a book in front of you which you don't necessarily have the expertise to define a scope note around it specifically. You know what it is, you know that it's distinct from an existing term, and you know that it would be useful to have a term, or at least it would to you. But you rely on people with different expertise, different knowledge, sometimes outside of libraries and archives as well. What support is there for speaking to people beyond libraries to get that kind of expertise? Is that something that can be offered by the RBMS committees, or is it something that can be offered or that the RBSCG BSc can support as well? What is the process with that?
The short answer is yes, there is support available. It really depends on who you choose to approach first. I have in the past volunteered on what eventually became the CVEG committee, although my experience is now a good 12 or 14 years out of date. So I am very happy to be corrected in the chat, Sarah, if I get something wrong. Basically, the hope is that you will do your best with the submission form. The more information that you can provide about how you would like to use this term, the better. But the committee, whether that is RBSCG or RBMS, will then also do some additional research to look for literary warrant and how it is used by the wider community. If you can give the committee some pointers as to who to reach out to, that's very, very helpful. But you are not required to be an expert on a term before you propose it. Katie, does that match your experience?
Yeah, I mean, when I first started finding these plants in books, especially flowers I was finding in books, I reached out just on the what's it called, the Rare Books, List Rare Books mailing list, and said, was I asleep during that day at library school? Is there already a way to do this or not? Does anyone have anything? And that started to build up, relationship and connections with various other people who were also wondering about it, which very, very slowly worked up to the seminar we ended up having. And a big shout out to Wilbur Harrell and the guys at the Linnaean who really put that together. So I think just, talking, you'd always be surprised who might know someone who knows someone who knows something about it. So just talking to people about your pet topics all the time does pay off.
Excellent, thank you. And we've got one more question here about pressed plants. But is the pressed plant kept in the space it was found to reflect the original collector's design, and page numbers also catalogued, or is it usually placed somewhere else, perhaps for preservation reasons?
That really depends. on a variety of things. So I was just going to see if I covered it. I wrote up an article about the talk I gave at the conference last year, and there was a link to that in the links I put at the top. I can't remember if I talk about this there or not. So I mean, different institutions have done different things, and I'd say the number one thing to do if you find preserved plants is don't just throw them away, which is a thing that has happened a lot in the past. If they've left a stain, they're probably not staining anymore. That's probably happened a while ago. Leave them where they are if you can. In some instances where a book is very full of samples, some conservators have made amazing new housings that hold the samples separately with documentation as to where they were found. More often than not, actually, it's fine just to leave them where they are, maybe encase them in Melanex if you can, in situ, if you don't have a lot of resources to make new housing or a conservator to do it. The group of people I was working with on the term were also hoping to put together some guidelines about all the rest of the things to do with these when you find them. So the rest of the catalogue record, how to look after them. And I actually should, before speaking today, have found out where that had got to, but I haven't. So I will find out, and it will be when those guidelines are available, they will be announced in all the sorts of usual places. So there'll be more advice for people coming.
Excellent, thank you. And I think I can see that Jane has also included an excerpt from your article.
Thanks, Jane.
So you can refer to that as well.
Yeah.
And a link to the full article. Well, in that case, thank you both very much for your talk. And I just will remind everyone again, as you mentioned, Christine, there are still vacancies on the Bibliographic Standards Committee, aren't there, at the moment? So if people are interested, they can contact you directly, I assume.
Please email me. I can drop my email addresses in the chat, or they're in the link to the slides that I put at the beginning of the presentation. So yes, I would love to hear from you.
Marvelous. Thank you. Thank you both. And so now moving on to our third talk of the afternoon, we have Carly Richardson and Jenny Claire Crate, both from JISC. And together they'll be talking on enhancing discoverability and access for special collections, the role of JISC's Archive Hub and Library Hub in metadata transformation and aggregation.
Thank you. So I'll just start the presentation. There we go. Are you all able to see the slides?
Yes, we can see that.
Great. Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you to the organisers for holding this event. It's lovely to be presenting to you all today. And we will be presenting on enhancing discoverability and access for special collections, the role of JISC's Archives Hub and Library Hub in metadata transformation and aggregation. So I'm Carly, the product manager for Archives Hub, and I'm here with my colleague Jenny, who is the product manager for Library Hub. JISC's Archives Hub and Library Hub products have been running under various names for various companies for a long time, so I'll give you a brief history. Building on previous software developed by the University of Liverpool, Archives Hub has been running as a live service since 2000. The service was run at the time by a team within MIMUS, a national data centre based at the University of Manchester. And in 2014, MIMUS was transferred to JISC, along with Archives Hub. Library Hub, as we now know it, was launched by JISC in 2019, but represented a continuation of the COPAC, CCM, and Suncat services that had been absorbed into JISC from MIMUS and EDINA at the Universities of Manchester and Edinburgh, respectively. Library Hub also replaced the RL UK cataloguing database. Both services work closely with special collections teams across the UK and Ireland to shine a light on the unique and valuable items and collections they hold, which are often the USP of their institution. Both services also encounter significant challenges in the ingest, validation, and aggregation of the metadata associated with these collections, facing different issues with archival description and bibliographic library cataloguing standards. Archives Hub and Library Hub bring collections together to enhance their discoverability both nationally and internationally. So let me move on. For those of you that don't already know, I'll just give a little introduction to Archives Hub. So Archives Hub pulls together millions of unique records from diverse archives across the UK, be it university, local authority, business, cultural heritage, or community archives. These organisations provide their data as contributors, and we transform that, surface it, and provide cross-searching on our website with access through search engines like Google, resulting in more awareness and use of the collections, as well as more physical inquiries to visit. Archives Hub has been going for more than 25 years, and over that time we've gained 440 contributors. Therefore, we've got an active and passionate community around the product, which we have recently harnessed by creating the Archives Hub community, where we hold monthly virtual meetups and provide a space to share knowledge. So if you know of any archives or special collections who might benefit from becoming a contributor, please encourage them to get in touch or search Archives Hub community to join our community. Okay, so moving on to the data. We have 3 methods of contribution: spreadsheets, harvesting, and exporting. We have been developing internal tools over the last year in order to make these contribution methods as simple and easy as possible for contributors. And this has also allowed us to pause and think about any changes we want to implement during the transformation and validation of data before publication. Firstly, we have a template for contributing using spreadsheets, which may be used, for example, for contributors without a cataloguing system at all, or who have a system where there's no option to harvest or export XML, but they can export spreadsheets, which can then be matched to the columns in the spreadsheet template. The format we accept is XLSX or CSV. The second option is harvesting, so we can harvest from your systems with an OAI PMH endpoint, and some cataloging systems will already have this endpoint built in as standard, which we can then use to harvest your data. The format for the data we get from this method is EAD XML. As you will see later in our roadmap, we are focusing on this aspect at the moment in order to provide more efficient automated harvesting from several systems which are currently being used by our contributors. We want to enhance this option, as this means the data creator doesn't have to duplicate effort by inputting the data and then sending it to us. We can directly pull that data from your system. And finally, we do have the option of using our export template to export your data from Calm, but this will be used less and less in the future and maybe a little bit trickier to set up than the other contribution options. And again, this format we get back is EAD XML. When the format is XML, we use a standard of XML called Encoded Archival Description, EAD, which nicely maps onto fields compliant with the General International Standard for Archival Description, or ISADG. This is also how we've designed the spreadsheet template, so this maps to fields compliant with ISADG. We have such a diverse range of organisations contributing data from different sectors of different sizes, the list goes on. Therefore, we receive a diverse range of data too. That is why we have a minimal set of requirements for the data published on Archives Hub. We have made this minimal so that it isn't a barrier to contributing, but any of the validation we do helps to promote the discoverability and accessibility of this data on the web, therefore reaching a larger audience. In order to support our contributors, we also provide documentation and advice, workshops and learning sessions, email support, and we provide those templates. In terms of validation, we do have mandatory fields for any data contributed. There are 8 fields for a top-level record. These you can see listed on the slide and are all included as mandatory to help the user access this data. The Archives Hub team have approached this by thinking about the types of users that will be accessing this data and their purposes for accessing this online. For instance, a researcher can decide from the scope and content field if they should travel to look at a large amount of material, or to contact the archival library to ask for a digital copy if it is, say, just for one letter. From conditions governing access, a member of the public can find out if they need to sign up for a reader's card before visiting and consulting an item. For lower level records, we only ask for reference, level of description, and title as mandatory. And then we also have some validations around filtering, which is to allow the user to filter on some fields when searching on Archives Hub. For example, most data we receive includes machine readable date values, start and end dates, And we check that the start date does indeed start before the end date, so that a user can filter the collection by date. Generally, this type of validation also allows contributors to identify mistakes where the dates have been inputted incorrectly. One of the enhancements we've been able to implement whilst developing our internal tools is that we are now able to provide error reports back to our contributors if there are edits needed to their data when they have submitted it. These error reports are in the form of a spreadsheet, as you can see on the left-hand side, and they're in an easily readable format with understandable phrasing. We also provide a sheet that shares warnings, which may help if we have picked up on points in the data that are still valid, but may have mistakes present, and also a sheet which displays the list of any transformations which we have performed, so that any changes to the data are transparent for the contributor. And finally, we have the discoverable version of the data, shown here on the right-hand side. The data is displayed on the Archives Hub website. This is an example of a record shown, which has the minimum amount of fields required for a top-level record. There are varying degrees of detail for records provided, but this is an example of how, by even just contributing a top-level record of your collection, users may reach this page through searching terms from the title through Google or filtering by date. The XML can also be accessed from the website. And finally, I'd like to take you all through a quick overview of our roadmap for the rest of the year. So this roadmap is publicly accessible on the web so that all of our contributors can follow along with what we are focusing on. We have 2 ideas already in the done column, which was firstly launching our Archives Hub community, and secondly, improving the ability to contribute using spreadsheets. Right now, we are currently reviewing any higher education institutions that aren't part of Archives Hub to invite them to join, therefore increasing the representation of GISC members on Archives Hub. We are also undertaking a review of the information pages on Archives Hub, as with the product being established for such a long period of time, we want to make sure that all the information provided to users is accurate and up to date. At the moment, we are also improving our harvesting capability, as I mentioned earlier. So this is for users of ArchiveSpace, Atom, and Apexio. And as well, we will be looking at the simplest way to contribute data from axial collections. In the future this year, we will be undertaking our yearly accessibility testing and audit in order to update our accessibility statement. And we will be surveying our contributors as well as our diverse range of users visiting Archives Hub pages in order to gain feedback and insights into future development efforts. So I hope this has been useful, and I will pass on over to Jenny to hear about Library Hub and the MBK.
Thanks, Carly. Hi everyone, as Carly said, I'm Jenny Crate. I'm the product manager for Library Hub and the National Bibliographic Knowledge Base at GISC, and I work alongside Carly and the Archives Hub team in GISC's research management team. I'm just going to give a brief overview of Library Hub services and the database that underpins them, which is the National Bibliographic Knowledge Base, or NBK, because that is a bit of a mouthful. And then I'm going to briefly describe how we ingest data from our contributors at Library Hub, the sort of data that we accept, and the issues in local variations cause in the application of metadata standards for us when we're deduplicating within the database. So the NBK contains currently, today, it changes every day, over 165 million records from 205 contributing libraries across the UK and Ireland. That 165 million records are the individual records, and we then deduplicate those records. And at the moment, that gives us about 55 million deduplicated records. So that occurs where different libraries have a copy of identical items, and I'll come on to how we decide what's identical in a minute. The 205 contributing libraries include all of the national libraries in the UK, legal deposit libraries, academic libraries, and some small specialist libraries as well, such as those in museums, art galleries, and learned societies. And Library Hub, as Carly mentioned earlier, was launched in 2019 to replace COPAC and SUNCAT. Both of Library Hub, all of the services and the NBK are run by GISC. But the ownership of the data that is contributed is retained by the contributing library and or the various commercial vendors of bibliographic metadata that supply records to those libraries. The most well-known and well-used of the services that we work with is Library Hub Discover, which is a single search interface allowing users to interrogate the holdings of the 205 5 contributing institutions across a single search, with quick and advanced search options available, as well as an open Z3950 connection, an SRU and JSON API. Discover is freely available worldwide, regardless of who you are and where you are, enhancing the discoverability and reach of your library collections and special collections in particular, and creating a data set for use by scholars of bibliographic history. Discover carried out over 10 million searches last year, and 25% of those originated outside the UK, spread across over 180 different countries and territories, which gives you an idea of the reach that it gives. Library Hub cataloging is a repository of unlicensed MARC records. So that's where we share the unlicensed bibliographic records from the MBK for reuse by JISC members and by contributors to the MBK. And that's about 70% of the MBK at our last check about a couple of months ago. Cataloging also gives notes on the quality of the records against MARC 21 standards, which catalogers enjoy. And this service is accessed via the web or via a Z3950 connection directly into your library management system. So that, as I said, is free for JISC member libraries. That's the HE, FE and research member institutions. But if you give us your data into the MBK, even if you're not a JISC member, you can access and use Library Hub cataloging free of charge. And the third service that we run is Library Hub Compare, which works from the same data set that powers Discover, using the deduplicated index to allow libraries that contribute their data to the MBK to compare their collections with other MBK contributing libraries and to assess the relative rarity of their holdings. This is the tool that's going to be used in the very soon to be launched UK print book collection project, which aims to preserve the National Print Monograph collection and which is supported by RL UK, Sconnell, JISC and the British Library. I'm deliberately mentioning UK PBC here today because its aim is to identify and preserve access to items that are considered to be rare or scarce. So if there's it aims to have a minimum of 7 print copies of things that were published in 2010 or before. And my suspicion, having worked in higher education libraries, is that if you're from a big HE library, special collections and archives team, you're going to find people wandering across with things that have been identified as unique or scarce as part of this project. So I thought I would flag it up that from October this year, they might start to make their way to you with the rare things. So that was an overview of the services. This is a very high-level diagram giving an overview of the movement of the data that we get from our contributors around the various parts of the system. So when we talk about the MBK, what we're really talking about is not just one big database, but a series of containers. The information from the main Postgres database in the middle there is sent out to multiple EC2 clusters to enable faster retrieval. And the data we send to each cluster varies depending on the intended purpose of the data. So for Discover and Compare, we match the records and create the deduplicated index to improve collections comparison and to enable users of Discover to find the nearest copy of a very specific item. But for contractual metadata reasons, we can't use that database for Library Hub cataloging. So that isn't deduplicated, and it only contains records that are flagged as shareable, which weeds out, as I said, about 30% of the contributions to the MBK. The data isn't stored in MARC, and we don't assume that all of our contributors are contributing in MARC. It's transformed into mods XML, and I'll talk about how we do that in a sec, and then transformed according to use case, with the MARC record, if there is one, being stored in a column of our largest database. And currently that's stored in binary because it was formed in the 1990s. JSON's also supported in Postgres if anyone's interested in that, and we're thinking about moving from binary to JSON. In terms of the data ingest into the MBK, like our colleagues at Archives Hub, the Library Hub team accepts a variety of formats and standards via several transfer methods. We do deal largely with libraries cataloguing in MARC 21, and so we obviously accept .mrc files, MARC files. Library Hub Discover, which is freely available, deliberately doesn't distribute that metadata out in its native MARC format to preserve the contracts that libraries enter into with commercial vendors, but we do allow the download of the data in mods XML. And a couple of citation formats through Discover. And as I mentioned, we share the non-licensed MARC records via Library Hub cataloging along with MARC XML versions. We do also accept XML, and we're getting more and more of those as multifaceted collections are moving from having separate archival, library and museum systems into more all-encompassing systems like axial collections. So we are getting a lot more XML these days. In order to make sure that smaller and generally less well-resourced specialist libraries can also enter into the MBK, we also accept data in a CSV format. So we then transform that, we map it using just an XML spreadsheet. From the CSV file, we map each column into mods in the Library Hub support team, and then we pass that over to Library Hub's developer team, who create bespoke Python transformation scripts for each individual contributor. This is incredibly time consuming, and every time the contributing library decides to redo their spreadsheet format, we have to redo the bespoke Python script. And as a result, the onboarding and reloading of data from these types of collections is much, much slower than from the libraries that send us their data in Mark and XML. That doesn't mean that we don't pre-process any of the more standard data that we get in Mark and XML. Libraries do, as we all know, have a tradition of adopting local practices over time, and we need to programmatically iron those out in order to ingest data into our database and to display it in a way that ensures maximum discoverability. These things are usually something unusual to do with serials holdings or e-resources, but not always. It's worth noting that the non-native Mark data, so if you give us your data in a CSV file, for example, that we translate via Python, we don't use that in Library Hub cataloging, even if it is licensed for reuse and share, because for quality reasons largely. But we're thinking that we may need to revisit that decision soon because of the sheer volume of licensed metadata that's now coming into the MBK, and the lack of original metadata that we can share via cataloging. We're having to consider the lower quality metadata as well, so that there is something that people can use as a starting block for their record, rather than just starting from a blank canvas. In terms of the transfer methods, it happens in a variety of ways, again, to be as inclusive as possible of all different types of libraries. Largely it's SFTP, but increasingly we're having trouble with that. Local cybersecurity measures in libraries, particularly in higher education and museums, I find, mean that this isn't possible. And we have started setting up Amazon S3 buckets for easy transfer, and I can see that one of our contributing museum libraries that uses an S3 bucket is here today. Hi, Louise. We also accept WebDAV, and we also have a very small number of libraries set up for OAI PMH harvesting, which we would like to increase if possible, because that gives us greater control over the flow of data into the MBK. In a few cases, we're also able to harvest real-time availability data from library management systems using Z3950. But again, like SFTP, pulling data from systems is increasingly seen as a risk from local IT teams, and this feature hasn't expanded as much as perhaps initially had been planned at launch. And I'd like to just have a brief word about metadata currency here as well, because we don't specify an update frequency when people join the MBK. And that is because some collections we know are more static than others, particularly small and specialist ones. Although for collections management purposes, the more recent the data, of course, the more reliable your decisions are likely to be. The last update date for each of our contributors is shown on Library Hub Discover for the purposes of transparency, and that can be really important for people looking at collections comparison in Library Hub Compare and for the UK print book collection. You won't be able to read anything on this slide because it's incredibly tiny, some of that text, but it is 3 different versions of a Mark record or catalogue record for the same item in Library Hub Discover. And we offer all of the flexibility that I've talked about in terms of file formats, file transfer methods, because we want to enable all libraries to be able to join the MBK. And accordingly, our minimum record standard, therefore, is much lower than other union catalogues might demand. We actually only mandate a unique record ID of some kind and a title. So you can see the top left there, we've got rewards and fairies here, and that is all that we got in that record. But we will happily take more metadata than that if that's what you have. It makes your collection discoverable at a basic level if you only have a title. But of course, if you can enrich that metadata with things like ISBNs, publication details and subject headings, it's going to be more easily discoverable for users. Importantly, for special collections and archival teams, we preserve local notes and we surface those. So when the users click through from the aggregated record, onto your particular copy details in Library Hub Discover, they can make sure that they are looking at the specific copy of an item that they're looking for. So if they're looking for something that has a particular provenance or from a particular person's collection, or that may have interesting annotations and so on that you have catalogued in your record, they can identify that version. From a Library Hub perspective, low quality metadata or bare and sparse metadata doesn't just hamper discovery, but it also hampers the matching of the records for the items that are the same and the creation of our deduplicated records. So this big long record over on the right hand side is from Library Hub Discover, and it shows an item that's currently held in the MBK by 39 libraries, but there are definitely other entries in Library Hub Discover in the MBK that are likely for the same edition of the same item, but they haven't matched due to either inconsistencies in the metadata or omissions in the metadata. I'm going to really whiz through a few slides and talk through our matching and deduplication process, because that's the thing we get asked about the most in terms of our data. The matching process is deliberately conservative, erring on the side of caution to minimise the possibility of false matches being made, and the process is therefore fantastically complicated. Essentially, we assign a new title into the MBK and a place in an alphabetical list, and then we carry out a series of match tests against the items that we grab from either side of it in the alphabetical list. The easiest matches are where there are multiple unique identifiers, ISBNs, for example, in both items, and then it has an exact title match as well, and we accept that that is a match and we merge it into the existing aggregated record. But if that doesn't happen, then there is a more in-depth set of tests that goes through, and you won't be able to see those probably because it's small, but that looks at things like publication dates, authors, and volume numbers if we've only got one standard number match. And if that doesn't produce a match, it gets even more complicated, and we do a title and edition match as well. And then there are these final match tests and additional checks that look at things as granular as pagination, types of score, and map scale. What all this means is that the more accurate and full your metadata is, the more likelihood it is of making a match with identical items in the MBK. Matches will be prevented by discrepancies or differences in transcriptions of data. So things like the title and statement of responsibility, if they're not the same, it will immediately not match. If you add addenda in square brackets, if there are abbreviations and ellipses, if you make a guess about a date range or an assumption about a date of publication, those will prevent a match. From a matching point of view, from our point of view, this kind of inferred data is easier to record and deal with in a relevant notes field. But of course, that's going to have an impact on your end user experience. So this is where these large data aggregations do struggle, because of course, human intervention would make this much easier. But with 165 million records, that really isn't possible. And like Carly did, I'm just going to show you our high level roadmap at the moment. Our planned developments are a mix of improving the old and working on the new. So we're right at the end of a huge piece of work, actually, to move everything onto a new server real estate, which will improve cybersecurity for Library Hub services, but it'll also give us at JISC greater transparency around how much our infrastructure actually costs to run. We've just started working with JISC's UX team as well on an ambitious plan to refresh the 4 Library Hub service websites that haven't changed since 2019. And which will involve a lot of talking to librarians and other service users to make sure that what we do works for them. We're also revisiting our ideas around who we give access to and how we do that. And we're working with RL UK, Sconnell in the BL to deliver UK PBC, as I mentioned before, the UK print book collection. And then in our next column there, we've got the development of a new API layer, hopefully a RESTful API, something slightly more modern. And that will be created as part of the move to new user interfaces in the medium term. At the same time, we're going to review our back-end processes around data ingest and validation to remove some single points of failure and reduce our overall risk to the service. And then UK PBC, which I've mentioned, launches in October. And then we expect to be onboarding lots of new libraries, potentially lots of new higher education libraries into the MBK who want to participate in UK PBC. And then that's going to carry on expanding and turn into business as usual alongside the launch of our new site. And we've got lots of other stuff going on around new metadata standards and linked data, including at the moment the very early stages of a proposed pilot about linked data futures for the HE sector. So there's a lot going on. But I think that Carly and I have both highlighted that although local decisions about adoption of metadata standards are made for valid reasons and local discovery, they often hinder the seamless aggregation, sharing and reuse of data. At the time when the HE and glamour sectors face significant financial pressures, it may be worth critically re-examining the sustainability of these local practices, reassessing those past decisions and revisiting assumptions about user needs to explore opportunities to align more closely with established standards and unlock both financial and operational efficiencies. Moving towards a more standards-based approach can also facilitate collaborative description, collections management, simplify systems migrations, and ease the adoption of new tools and evolving standards. And there I'm particularly thinking about things like linked data, which can be and have been very slow to take root, but have long-term benefits in enhancing discoverability via semantic web and for accessibility as well. And I think I'll stop there.
Thank you both very much. And we do have a few questions in the chat. So the first one here is, how do Archives Hub and Library Hub deal with manuscript material that is listed in library catalogues? Do you tend to incorporate special collections material into Archives Hub directly, or are there issues with metadata mapping between various professional practices?
Ooh, Jenny,
it depends how you've catalogued it. So if it is in your library management system and catalogued using Mark 21 bibliographic metadata standards, it generally gets ingested with your Library Hub contributions, and it would only be if it's in your archival system and catalogued using archival standards like EAD that it would end up in your Archives Hub. So we don't split contributions and then farm them out to the two services. People contribute independently.
Yeah, I think in a similar way in terms of how teams are set up within institutions as well. So we'll have quite a lot of special collections in the same system if they have a special collections and archives sitting together within that institution. So I think around the individual contributors' processes and also their systems is really how those decisions are made.
We do link back and forth between the two services as well. So where we have a Library Hub contributor, they get a sort of an information page about their library that has things like your interlibrary loan codes and how visitors would find you and contact you if they wanted to visit your collection. And if you are also a contributor to the Archives Hub, we then have a link that they can click and go through to your Archives Hub page there. But the two systems are managed and the data is ingested entirely independent of one another.
Perfect, thank you. And do you have any advice for smaller institutions who are thinking about contributing to Library Hub?
Yeah, so on that final slide there, there was an email that was help@gisc.ac.uk, and that gets sent through to us at Library Hub. Just get in touch, it's absolutely fine. We have, I think it's sort of 50-50, sort of large HE libraries and smaller specialist libraries. And I've accepted data in a Word table before. I'd rather not, but if that's how you're cataloguing, please do. I won't take a PDF. Have been asked.
Excellent, thank you. And another question, do you use 510 subfield 4 fields, reference numbers, to match for aggregations? For example, for early printed books, ESTC numbers and others, it could enable merging despite marks of ellipses, and etc. We do use ESTC in particular, and ISTC as well, alongside ISBN, ISSN, ISMN as the initial unique ID match. So that definitely does help. Yeah, we do that. And I think we've got time for just one more quick question. I can see there's a few here, but if it's okay, I'll pick the top one here, and then perhaps the other two, if either of you or both of you would be happy to respond to them in chat after, that would be appreciated. But the question here is, has Library Hub worked with anyone using Keep Thinking's QI CMS?
We haven't as yet, but if it's a CMS, it's likely to output XML or CSV, so that would be absolutely fine. It would mean that we'd be in a situation where you would export your data into a file and then send us that file somehow through one of those methods that I mentioned on the slides there. But it's certainly, not having worked with Keep Thinking QI doesn't mean that we wouldn't be able to relatively easily.
Excellent, thank you. I think that's all we've got time for now, but there are a few more questions in there, so please do carry on having conversations in the chat, and I'm sure if there are any outstanding questions that attendees can email either of you directly as well. I'd be happy with that. So thank you both very much again for your talk. And we'll move on then to the last talk of the day and last talk of the conference from Anna Maria Sashani, who is from the School of Advanced Studies at the University of London. Anna Maria will be speaking on operationalizing responsible AI in cultural heritage, policies, practices, and opportunities. Over to you.
Hello, hello all. Hopefully you can see my slides, right?
Yes, we can see that.
Great. Many thanks for the kind invitation. It's a pleasure to be in this conference, and I think my talk kind of provides a nice full circle moment with the first talk of the day of Cambridge, the Arts Project. And also kind of offers a kind of reflective, let's say, takeaway, and hopefully also a call to action to conclude this amazing conference. So let's start. So, of course, artificial intelligence is not new, as we all or we may know. So the history of AI is vast and complex. From Alan Turing's paper on computing machinery and intelligence back in 1950s, with the emblematic question, can machines think? And the Dartmouth Summer Workshop on Artificial Intelligence in 1956, we celebrate the 70th anniversary of this event, which was like the founding event of artificial intelligence as a field. But things have changed since then, and artificial intelligence actually has evolved really fast in recent years. And we are now kind of entering, I mean, we have entered the data-driven AI era, and why things are different and yeah, more complicated today. I think because like in the data-driven AI era, knowledge can be learned from data rather than being explicitly coded into a machine, which was the original concept of AI. And of course, because like, you know, several advancements led to this data-driven era, including more computational power, more and bigger data, better algorithms to process this data, and also a commercial adoption of AI, which kind of skyrocketed over the last 3 years. And what's really special in this kind of data-driven AI, and also really challenging at the same time, is that agency, and in particular human agency, is limited, and concepts and processes around creativity, originality, ownership, and responsibility are highly controversial. So how AI is embraced in the cultural heritage sector. So this is a very simplified version of my approach, but I think that it will, yeah, I think it will give an idea of how I approach AI in cultural heritage. So first of all, AI is used in professional practice to support or automate specific professional tasks, like this business operations that we heard in the very first talk. So to improve workflows, to enhance efficiency, accuracy, perhaps accessibility to resources. And this aspect of AI usage is currently dominated by commercial and proprietary systems and applications. There are a couple of custom-built AI systems designed for specific research. I mean, we've heard from Cambridge that there are things in the making in their hub, and of course in research around specific preservation tasks, for example, access, or more kind of, you know, specific research questions. But let's be honest, this area of work is still limited. And there's also another area of work of AI into collections as data, so cultural heritage collections and data sets, because they are of great quality, of course, very well curated, highly diverse, and often are also openly available. They're increasingly used as training data for AI models, and these are commercial AI models that they're doing this kind of scrapping without clear attribution or transparent ways. And yeah, there is, of course, commercial AI pressures on collections and are becoming increasingly evident the last couple of years. So some institutions, like, for example, the National Library of the Netherlands, have chosen to close down or restrict access to their digital collections, driven by concerns that, for example, AI companies might exploit the content without proper credit or attribution, or they might violate their licensing and terms of use. And at the same time, also large-scale AI-driven web scrapping, AI bots, places significant strain on digital collections infrastructures. There was a recent report from GLAM A-Lab, and I would just put the front page there for you to have a look. And this pressure in infrastructures and collections, they're sometimes is at unsustainable levels. In some cases, this has led to temporary disruptions, but also some institutions like the Internet Archive, for example, and other institutions had to shut down their access for an amount of time or even permanently. So the GLAM community's response to AI has been kind of fragmented. And this, of course, is a result of various factors. I just grouped here a number, but I think that, we can also think of many, many more. So, for example, the willingness versus capacity gap. There are many institutions that are really eager to experiment with AI, but there's the lack of time, resources, or in-house expertise to do so, and also to do so sustainably. There's this pace mismatch, the rapid evolution of AI technologies and systems kind of contrasts really sharply with the more slow, cautious operating models of cultural heritage institutions. There's also an even distribution of resources. So there are larger, well-funded institutions that they may pilot AI technologies or projects, while smaller or more like less privileged institutions struggle to engage at all. There's, of course, the skills and training gaps that there were and they're still there, staff that are often lack specialized skills, and of course training opportunities to engage with new technologies. There is the lack of clear national, international, but also sector-wide legal guidance on issues that they're emerging, such as, for example, AI and copyright and how that influence, for example, intellectual property, human rights, licensing of the resources. And of course, there is infrastructure fragmentation. I mean, we've heard on this over the last presentation. So there are many collections management systems, metadata standards, workflows across institutions that make it difficult to adopt a kind of shared AI approach. And of course, there is risk aversion in institutions and a lack of sector-wide coordination around this new era. So responsible AI kind of emerge, I think, not as a one-size-fits-all solution, but rather as a kind of sector-friendly and compatible approach. So this is why I would like to frame it, to engage with AI and AI developments. For me, responsible AI provides a framework that kind of prioritize the development and deployment of AI systems that are human-centered and that align with kind of ethical principles and values that are the core of the heritage sector, such as transparency, fairness, ethical alignment, and also environmental sustainability and responsibility. And also, responsible AI should not be treated as a kind of afterthought or a fancy add-on in our work. Rather, I think that it needs to be embedded across every layer of the AI stack. So from infrastructure, compute, data collection, the data that we're collecting and we're using to train the model training process, to system development and also user interaction with the systems. So however, is extremely difficult for if not impossible, to design or even meaningfully discuss, let's say, responsible AI for systems that are fundamentally irresponsible. And with irresponsible, I mean, you know, the AI tools, the software we rely on in our professional lives, most of them are developed and released by commercial, profit-driven companies. And these companies often appropriate terms and values that, you know, the sector has long championed, such as responsibility, openness, and transparency. But, you know, they apply them in ways that they are more or less opaque, misleading, or directly contrary to their intended meaning. So in what follows, I'm going to present 4+1 pillars of operationalizing responsible AI, which I've developed and proposed through my BRAID research fellowship, as well as my professional academic practice. So across the sector, there is, let me start from the first one. Across the sector, there is a clear trend around issuing an AI policy. So every institution is now drafting an AI policy. If your institution doesn't yet have, I think they're well working on it. Yet in most cases, these policies remain highly generic, focusing primarily on the use of proprietary tools and software, and they tend to rely on kind of big words and catchy terms, like, you know, while offering little in the way of concrete, very tangible, practical guidance for professional and researchers. What is needed here is a shift from ambitious, high-level statements to more actionable, everyday practices that can be implemented across projects and teams. So, for example, one practical step that is currently employed by a number of cultural heritage institutions and teams is the use of data sets or data cards or data envelopes for data sets. That is structured documentation that makes very transparent how a data set has been created, by whom and for what purpose. And this is particularly useful when this data set is going to be used as training data for an AI model. Data envelope offers a more contextualized approach to data documentation, capturing also kind of the social and the ethical dimension of data. And another kind of, in the similar vein, another practice is also the transparent documentation for AI models. So there are also model cards in place. I had here like an example of a model card from Hugging Face on a cultural heritage collection of a historic newspaper, widely adopted again from cultural heritage institutions, and they provide structured information about how a model was trained, its intended uses, limitation, and also ethical consideration. And also you can also document different stages of the model deployment within the model card, and that's very useful as we move along the deployment phase of, and also the foundational model and the different states of usage of these models. And many of these practices emerge from community needs. And I think this is also the moment where we need to highlight the importance of, building communities, what the Cambridge Hub is trying to do, actually, and capacity around AI experimentation and responsible practice, where professionals can share knowledge, exchange practices, and collaboratively address challenges that they encounter. So I've just grouped here a number of initiatives in this area. The arts project from Cambridge that we heard earlier today, the AI for LAM, the Big LAM community at Hugging Face, and also the newly established network that we initiate with my colleague Paula Westbanger and Brett Fellow, focusing on heritage, AI, and law. And it's really crucial for the cultural heritage community to also engage on, in the development of accessible regulation around AI. This is really an important, I think, moment for us, and to contribute in a kind of landscape that is and remains in flux, especially in the UK, where copyright and intellectual property frameworks related to AI are still unsettled. Many of us remember or even contributed in late 2024 open consultation on copyright and AI. Together with my co-fellows at the Braids, we also contributed a collective response highlighting also specific needs for the cultural heritage sector. And we were not alone. Over 11,000 responses were received. So this was, I think, a bold sign towards like the need of more kind of actionable, responsible AI work, but it remains to be seen, how this will be translated into actual laws. Of course, another example is also supporting discussions around National Data Library, that it's part of the AI Opportunities Action Plan here in the UK. I mean, we've heard that the creation of National Data Library is going to benefit from cultural heritage institutions, and they're looking to have copyright cleared assets in this National Data Library work. So it's really important, for the community, for all of us, to contribute in shaping this infrastructure investment for our communities. And just in the final couple of slides, so another area that I think that's really important on operationalizing responsible AI is focusing on training. A central finding of my fellowship was that there is a very, very there is a well-known but kind of, it's an elephant in the room gap in the training provision, not only for AI but for digital skills in general, but also for AI across the cultural heritage community. And I personally see training and knowledge as the backbone of any AI development and experimentation work. And my work is specifically focusing on helping professionals to kind of demystify this AI black box. I'm working on developing a openly available training suite. It's going to be hosted at the Reshaped training platform. It's the national training platform from SAS. And kind of like an early outcome of this effort was a toolkit focusing on generative AI, data protection, intellectual property in digital cultural heritage. This is openly available online. And a final example of operationalizing responsible AI is, I think, particularly promising. Over the last couple of months, there are a couple of initiatives that they have released large openly licensed data sets and language models trained in these data sets, such as the Harvard's institutional books corpus, Elethor's common pile, and also Playa's common corpus. So these efforts actually shows that value-driven alternatives to commercial AI are possible, and so that public domain resources should and could underpin high-quality AI models with transparency and legal clarity for our sector. To conclude, GLAM sector and the staff working in our institutions are uniquely positioned to influence the ethical and responsible use of AI within and beyond their organization, addressing in practice key concerns such as trust, transparency, democratization, and care. All core values that are fundamental to the mission of GLAM institutions. And operationalizing responsible AI, for me, goes beyond theoretical principles and big words or high-level policies, on focusing on embedding these values across all stages of AI life cycles and also in everyday practices. It's not enough to advocate for responsible AI. I think it's equally even more important to imagine and implement actionable steps that bring this principle into practice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that talk. And I can see in the chat that it's already provoked quite a bit of discussion as well. So I'll go through some of the questions that have been raised. But the first one is, does responsible AI address the question of whether to use AI rather than just focusing on how to use it?
I think this is this should be like the first question we should ask ourselves, whether AI is, for example, necessary for a particular task, for example, or for a particular process. So AI is not a panacea. We just need to it's a set of technologies that can enhance our work. So yeah, I think it's really important, to start with this question, and once we have like a clear answer, then move to make choices on what and how to use.
And another question which has been discussed, albeit quite a broad one, but could you speak a little bit to the environmental impact of using AI and how it compares to sort of not implementing AI strategies in cultural heritage operations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we should have another conference just for this question, actually. Yeah, we now know the environmental impacts of computational intensive work, and especially AI. We know, for example, and we learn every day more on the impact of huge data centers or the compute power that is needed to train a very simple model, or even the energy that is needed to store data sets. So many aspects of the AI that we don't see when we use ChatGPT, for example, is something that is very alarming for for the work that we're doing. And I think that especially cultural heritage institutions, but also research institutions, they should consider environmental impact and then all these discussions that they're now undergoing into a bigger picture when they are designing their AI policies. I think there is always a missing bit on the environmental impact in the AI policies of cultural heritage institutions or research institutions, and we should make sure that these discussions are there, that they're happening, and that we are also pushing, the right, let's say, to the right direction as much as we can, from our institutional point of view.
Thank you. And another question here is about how to future-proof, given how much commercial AI models can change with updates. If that is a model that you're using, then how do you know that what you're working with will still work in the future?
Yeah. The answer is simple. You don't know. I think it's really difficult to future-proof. I mean, all these practices that I discussed, for example, the model cards, or even the regulation around model transparency, for example, that we have seen this in the EU AI Act. I think that there are limitations in in how we can predict, let's say, the reaction of the model in the future. So I don't think that is safe enough to say that that the data set or the model that you're using now, and for example, a number of things on this based on the information you have, this going to stay the same in the next couple of months or years. So yeah, I don't think that it's an easy question to answer.
Yeah, no, I think a number of quite difficult and thorny questions arise sort of around this subject, and certainly I think this talk has provoked quite a lot of discussion, a lot of asking of quite difficult questions in the chat, which is good. I suppose that's in a way the purpose of this conference. But certainly I think enough to have another talk or another whole conference on the subject, really. If there aren't any more questions in the chat, I think we're coming just up to time. So thank you very much, Anna Maria, for your talk. And if anyone does have any questions, is it okay for them to contact you directly as well? Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And thank you to all the speakers today for your talks. As I said, this is the last day of the conference, so thank you not just for today's speakers, but for the speakers we've had throughout the last few days, and thank you to everyone as well for attending. I will now pass over to the RBSCG Chair, Tanya Kirk, for some closing remarks.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks so much for chairing today. Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate really Alex's thanks. Thanks so much to all our speakers for a really interesting and inspiring programme. Thanks to our sponsors for their continued support for our conference, and especially to our conference organisers, the heroes behind the scenes, Rich Ragg and Rianne Isaac, for their amazing work. It absolutely wouldn't happen without loads and loads of peddling under the surface, but they've done an amazing job. Thanks so much to all you delegates for coming and for your thoughtful questions and engagement, and for the fascinating sharing of knowledge and the occasional hilarity that's been happening in the chat. I've been really enjoying reading everyone's responses. A few practical things. So information about accessing the recordings of the papers will follow in due course, so please keep an eye on your emails. Please also keep an eye out for the feedback survey, which will be circulated really soon. This conference and the format of our conferences come from previous suggestions, so we want to keep hearing from the community to ensure that our conferences continue to reflect what's useful. And we also do take suggestions into account for day events where we can't mount a whole conference about those topics. As I mentioned at the beginning, our AGM this year will be held separately. We're hoping to combine this with an online event later in the autumn. So please watch this space, and your attendance will be greatly appreciated at that. And it's worth saying that we have some events in the planning stage at the moment around using special collections for teaching, on rare book cataloguing, and we're hoping to run our really popular online event on acquisitions again, for those who couldn't attend it last time. A word about the conference for next year. So next year, the conference will be held in person, and it will be at St John's College, Cambridge. It will be held from the 9th to the 11th of September, so a week later than normal. And it will be on an exciting theme, which we're just developing at the moment, which will be around collections and place. And in the meantime, a bit of a call to action. So as I mentioned at the start of the conference, we're very keen to receive submissions for our newsletter, whether these are reactions to this year's topic of conference or general articles that will be of interest to rare books and special collections librarians. So please do contact our newsletter editors. I'm hoping someone will put their email addresses in the chat again. And another reminder, as Christine mentioned in her paper today, we're looking for new members of the Bibliographic Standards Committee. So please do get in touch with Christine if you might be interested in hearing more about that. And with that, I'd just like to thank you all again so much for coming. And I really hope to see you in Cambridge next year. And I hope you all have a lovely weekend. Bye.